time for another episode with another friend from the interwebs, and the internet is a great thing. This guy, my co-host today, I guess you could say, my co-reviewer, he is from the Chicago area. I'm from Edmonton, yet the internet makes us sound like we're in the same room at the same time. It's pretty sweet. If I mentioned it, he hosts a podcast called the Pop Punk and Pizza Podcast. Jacques Lamour, he is on the show. Let's get down to business talking Boston Manor.
There used to be a way to stick it to the man. It was called rock and roll. Guess what? Oh, no. The man ruined that, too, with a little thing called MTV.
Don't talk to me about rock and roll. I'm not there in the clubs and on the streets, and I'm living it. I am rock and roll.
Did I listen to pop music because I was miserable? Or was I miserable because I listened to pop music?
And you go by Jacques, right?
I go by Jacques, yeah. My given
Your
name...
radius.
Yeah, my given name is Jacob, actually. But back in high school, when I started high school, I took French class, and I chose I chose that as my French name, and then I was like, you know what? It's like I want to
keeping it.
Yeah, I was like, I want this to be like my stage name, because I was in a band at the time. I was also in acting too, and I thought this works well. I mean, my heritage is French Canadian, obviously with the last name Lamour. So I was like, it works, it fits. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and also my boss. It was funny. Now that you bring that up, just real quick story about radio. I wanted the station I work at. I started as an intern 4 years ago, and they only knew me as Jacques. They didn't know that my name was actually Jake. And so when it came time for them to put me on the air, they said, okay, my boss is like, we can't call you that. I was like, that doesn't work. You're going to, because I started out playing I was working on the country station.
Right.
And he's like, that doesn't work for country. So, yeah. So it's like, well, what are we going to call you? I said, well, my real name's Jake. And he's like, oh, well, it's like, there you go. So anyway.
So did you ever officially change your name, or it's just what you go by?
No, it's just what I go by. And I mean, pretty much, people in my community that are surrounded by the in the listening area of the radio station, they all know me as Jake. But when it comes to pop punk and pizza and like the music world, like if that's how you know me is from the podcast, right? Or if you know me from when I played in my band, The Projection, me as Jacques. Yeah,
that's awesome. So. But now when you fill out like government forms, you have to put an alias down, don't you? Because I'm assuming you'd fill it out as Jake or Jacob, right? Like as your first name, but if there's ever like an also known as sort of thing, you probably have to put Jacques on there. I don't know.
I guess I haven't filled out enough government forms, and also I don't think that's been out there or or on any of the forms I've had to fill out is what I mean. I don't think that's been on there.
Like sometimes, so like on the radio, I use actually my middle name as my last name. Part of that's just because like I don't want people, looking me up on Facebook and being like, oh, there he is, right? Like,
right.
And so in that sense, it's kind of a bonus because I never have to put anything as like any other names I've gone by, because technically it's still my name, David James, right? So I'm like, yeah, it's fine.
So you're not lying, yeah. And it's easy. It's easy to say, rolls off the tongue.
That's right.
And, I know a lot of people who have done the same thing. They don't give their real name.
Yeah, the double first name thing.
The double, and it's funny you mention that, because every time I actually meet someone that has a last name that's like a first name, I always think of a girl that I dated back in the day that was one of her deal breakers, was that if your last name is also a first name, that she would not date you. Yeah.
Oh, that's too funny. That's too funny.
I know. I always think about that.
That's great. So we're gonna cover the new album from Boston Manor, Welcome to the Neighborhood. If you didn't judge that by the title of this episode, This could be confusing though, because we're crossing over. So if you're listening to music, to my peers, the name of the album we're covering is in the title of the episode. I have no idea what you're going to name it though.
I'm not sure either, honestly. I was either going to name it that, or I was going to name it Music to My Peers, because this is your podcast. This was you're the one who reached out to me, which I'm super grateful for, by the way.
Well, so here's the funny thing. So a little while ago, I feel like I read someone commented on a YouTube video. They're like, oh, someone should start a podcast that's called the Pop Punk Pizza Party Podcast. And I was like, that's actually kind of hilarious. And I kind of toyed with the idea, even though Music to My Peers was already, a thing that I was doing. I was like, maybe I could change the name. And then randomly on Instagram, either you followed me or you came up as a suggestion, one or the other. And I was like, oh, Pop Punk and Pizza. That's hilarious. So that's why I initially messaged you being like, I literally thought of using something very similar for a podcast name. So I feel like it's a natural sort of fit crossover thing. We both kind of, focus on pop punk and, for me, like pop punk and the umbrella, I guess you could say, emo, all that kind of stuff that falls under it.
It's a huge umbrella, that's for sure.
And I mean, this album is, it's a prime example, because I wouldn't necessarily call this album a pop punk album by any means. There's not a whole lot of speed on it or anything like that. But to me, if you haven't listened to Boston Manor before, and for you said you hadn't, is that right?
Yeah, this was my first time. So
yeah, and I made myself a little bit familiar with their last album before this one, but it's kind of like the vibe I get is sort of like brand new kind of thing, like that sort of take on, I guess you could say, pop punk meets emo type stuff. I don't know if you'd agree with that, like going with the brand new label.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate, because there's not. I mean, there's a touch of pop punk influence, but like you say, it's kind of all over the place. It's more on the darker side.
Definitely.
Emo, even like industrial sounding at some points.
Especially kind of like interluding in between songs and whatnot. I think you definitely get a little bit of that vibe and some kind of like underlying parts of songs. Nothing that's necessarily in your face as far as an entire song structure is concerned, but it's definitely you can hear the influence of, I guess industrial would be a good way to put it, in the music. I also found, I don't know if you picked up on this at all, but I want to say it might be on the track "Flowers in Your Dustbin," actually, which is track 2.
I really enjoyed that track. By the way, I liked the lyrical theme of it. I was like, and so that's creative.
So there's something that I don't. This just kind of jumped out to me, but the guitar effect that's used on the lead guitar really sounds like they're hinting at some new metal influences. If I'm kind of looking at it, going, man, that I don't know if it's I don't think it's a chorus effect. It's something maybe like a flange that just reminds me of old Korn in a way, just on the lead guitar. I'm not saying that Boston Manor is not a new metal band by any means, but there's just something there that reminded me. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But you talk about kind of the lyrical, idea behind "Flowers in Your Dustbin," which I guess interesting in so that flower in your, if I'm just a flower in your dustbin line or whatever is I was reading somewhere, it's a take from Sex Pistols' "God Save the Queen." There's a line in there where they reference that. Let's see if I can...
So maybe that's where Henry, I think Henry is the lead vocalist. I believe maybe that's where he got it from then.
And so, I mean, they are from England. Right. And so it says, the line is also likely an homage to the Sex Pistols classic "God Save the Queen," which contains the line, "We're the flowers in the dustbin." Because then a couple tracks later on England's Dreaming, is that what it's called? England's Dreaming? That's also England's Dreaming. That's from "God Save the Queen" as well, which is kind of funny. So there is that kind of, a bit of a reference going on. But so I guess the idea of the album is that, so they are from Blackpool.
Yes.
And so I guess, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about England and city history and all that kind of stuff. But I guess Blackpool being on the coast is really, or was really, like a tourist destination. People would come, beach time, all that kind of stuff. But it's sort of declined. And so, there's now a lot of poverty. There's a lot of drug use and all this kind of stuff going on in Blackpool, especially like when the tourist season is over, that stuff spikes. And so the entirety of this album is supposed to be about that in particular, right? And and I feel like Henry's writing it from kind of different perspectives throughout the record. So, but what I found interesting, and I don't know how many times you got to give this record a listen or like read through the lyrics, but I can almost see, and I have a very easy time, and I love it when albums do this, of the record from track 1 all the way to how many tracks we got on here? Track 13. Okay.
No, I thought it was 14, but yeah, pretty close.
Yeah, tells a story. I mean, you can look at it as like separate songs, and like different perspectives, but at the same point, I feel like it tells this story, of a man who, especially in "Flowers in the Dustbin," I think one of the first lyrics in that song. I'm a victim of an old regime. I was promised gold by a silver screen. Just like someone chasing his dreams and then, like kind of falling on hard times and turning to drugs. It's a Hollywood cliche, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely. And
but
obviously
being in England.
You're right. I was going to say, I mean, he's referencing his hometown, or Blackpool. And I did get a chance this interview popped up on my Twitter yesterday of them talking to, I think it's Rock Sound magazine, and they do these, Rock Sound does these little like 10-minute interviews with the bands, and it's a video that they post on YouTube. And I was watching the one with Henry and Mike there from Boston Manor, and they were talking about how the whole record is inspired by their hometown, and that it is talking about like how there's all kinds of crap and dark things happening in the town. And obviously the record is dark, so it kind of...
very much, yeah. Which I was quite... I kind of described this record to someone as like, sneak up on you good. Like, I wasn't really expecting a whole lot from it, but when I got into it and dug into it with, kind of like each track, I was like, okay, what's next? And I mean, the album definitely, to me, it does kind of hit a bit of a stale spot, especially after, I'd say, the first 4 tracks. It kind of melts together a little bit and then comes back around for me towards the end. But I was going to say, if I can continue about, like the story, there are different songs on this, for instance, like Tunnel Vision being a song where I'm like, okay, I feel like it's now, so he's chased his dream, he's, hard drugs, ruined his life, but he's also got a partner or whatever in all this. And Tunnel Vision is written from their viewpoint, saying like, basically in the metaphor of like a car crash, like you were so set on this and drugs and we've fallen apart, right? Like you've driven us off a cliff sort of thing because you couldn't see it coming. It says your tunnel vision's killing me slowly, which I'm like, yeah, that's a tough song to swallow if that's directed towards you, I guess. But,
yeah.
And then as kind of like the record goes on and rounds out, there are some songs where I go, okay, is he getting a little more like, I don't know how to, if I can't have it, no one can, for instance, like that song, he's like, it's written, he comes into it like, I'm a big man with lots of big guns. That's the opening line in the song.
Yes.
And I'm like,
yeah.
What?
I was thinking about that too. There's moments where it's like, no, I'm always right. And
yeah. And so like, that's what I feel like. I mean, I don't know that, like, I feel like he's taking a stance, like if he's been approached saying like, you're ruining us or you're ruining your life. And he's like, no, I'm okay. Like I've got this sort of thing. I'm always right, like you say. And then it, like a couple tracks later gets to the song Stick Up. And I'm kind of like, okay, are we literally talking about like a holdup, like a bank robbery or whatever?
Yes.
Like when I hear that song, I'm immediately taken to, is it Jackie Brown, the Quentin Tarantino movie or is it I feel like it's Jackie Brown, where it's like the couple's in the diner and all of a sudden they stand up and they pull the guns out and they're like,
oh, okay. I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's Jackie Brown, and it's been a while since I watched those older Tarantino movies, but like, so like this is the picture I get, but I also feel like it's used more as a metaphor, kind of like taking, like maybe that relationship hostage or whatever, and being like, but also like begging, like you need to help me, you need to get me on my feet sort of deal. And then I kind of feel like the last song, The Day I Ruined Your Life, as dark as this may seem, kind of ends with a suicide. Like if we're telling that whole story, I can very easily get into a picture where I'm like, okay, I think either that or it's just like he was able to pinpoint sort of where it all went south.
Yeah.
It's a heavy song. I know you said when you listened to it, you kind of, I don't think you got to listen to the last track.
I was going to say that's the one track that I was like, I did not get to listen to.
Yeah. And it's like, it's interesting because like the lyrics in the verse. I mean, maybe it's stretching to say that he, takes his own life in the end of this story. For me, it's like, okay, it's a really depressing end if that's the case. But like the lyrics are like, I memorized the features of your face, the shadows on your lips and your cheek. I hope you had a lovely day and cherished our final week. Can hardly look you in the eye because I have got to pick the day that I ruin your life, the day that I ruin your life. The smell of home makes me feel sick because it reminds me of you, and still I've got to pick the day I ruin your life. And then it goes on in the bridge. I told you that things would be okay. Why'd you have to make me lie? I wish that we had never met at all. The thought of you makes me cry. So I don't know if he's like kind of coming to that realization. Obviously, it could also just be viewed just the end of a relationship. Like but I don't know. It's a heavy album to say the least. And I could very easily see a story that goes from point A to point B. But also, as they mentioned, they don't say that's what's going on. They just say it's all about life in Blackpool, which is
right. And
interesting.
And
too.
maybe that's something I wondered too when I was listening throughout the record, if it was specifically about one relationship or if it's referring to maybe a relationship he was in and also other people in his life in the town of Blackpool,
Yeah.
and just kind of like how day-to-day life is and how there were some major dramatic moments while being there. I do know, in part of that interview that I did watch, they were saying that it's not a concept record, but they could say it's loosely concept. Yeah. They said there's obviously a theme that goes throughout the whole thing, which exactly what you were just saying. So, and I mean, anyone who listens to this record is going to know that. And there were a lot of points, and I can't remember which songs. I didn't write down which ones, but when I was listening to this in the car, there were some parts where it'd go into the next song, and I'm like, did the record end? Because it was so quiet.
Oh yeah, that happens. Yeah, it happened a couple times to me too. Or I'm like, if it was like playing in the background somewhere, I was like, oh, did I gotta go Oh no, it's
right.
It's still going.
Right, that's what I thought. I was like, and I kept thinking, I was like, I thought this thing was like a full album. Like, what happened? And then all of a sudden, it starts. However long that intro is.
And I do wonder if there's like a purpose to that, because that seems like something you could. Because you're right. Sometimes it's very obvious that there's this long drawn out silence, and I kind of go, is there a purpose to that, or is this just? Because it's an easy fix, in post, you can just trim down, your silence or whatever. But, and so I guess the thing is like when I hear this album, like with track 1, Welcome to the Neighborhood, like that's not, really like your typical title track or really a typical opener. Like it is and it isn't. It's kind of longer, I think, than just being like, oh, it's just this little intro of a song. Because how long are we here? It's like almost 3 minutes long. And the way it plays out, I can almost, if this were to be like, if they were to say, yeah, this is a story, that track 1 almost reminds me of like, okay, our protagonist or maybe he's even the antagonist, depending on how you view this story. But the protagonist is already down on his luck where we're starting, right? Like he doesn't have a home. He's living on the streets sort of thing. And but he's like kind of just hit those points, and it's the people that are also living on the streets that are singing to him like "Welcome to the Neighborhood" sort of thing. So I can almost envision like the very first scene in a musical where you know you have your main character and he's surrounded by all these like rough looking individuals who are singing "Welcome to the Neighborhood." If you could leave, you would, but you know you can't, right?
Yeah. It's funny you brought up the whole musical thing, because that's kind of what I thought of. I was thinking off the bat, just because, you know, I've seen it so many times, Les Miserables, you know, because that's such a dark, you know, story. And I feel like Les Miserables kind of talks about being stuck, you know.
Sure.
And that came to mind. Not that any of it sounds like Les Miserables. I guess that's what came to my mind, just because I had seen that. But yeah, and that's what, when I first listened to or when I first put the record on, I was like, what am I getting into? I was like, what did I sign up for? And then the next track is like all in your face, and it's got the hooks, and I'm like, oh, okay. I was like, now we're going. So yeah, it's definitely like a little introduction of what the record's going to be about.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because the song "Halo" might be one of my favorite
which is their single.
Songs. Yeah, and it might be one of my favorite songs to be released, at least in the last couple of months. I think it's when that chorus hits and the hook hits you, I'm like, every time I can't help but turn it up and then turn it up a little bit more. They've got some really great moments on here. You know, like the first, like I said, track 1, okay, it's fine. But then track 2, 3, and 4 are probably the most solid kind of tracks on the record, and they're in a row. The end, I do really like the last track though too. It's got a great end. But I just think there are so many, you know, moments in those first couple of songs. Even looking, you know, at track 4, just with the whole like that's England's Dreaming, just the whole like "bury me" line. When I first heard it, it's just like kind of cuts out. It's like "bury me" and then goes into the chorus. I'm like, oh, it's too good.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. They kind of they started off. I guess it's typical for most records to be like that. They make sure like the first 3 or 4 songs are gonna, you know, are like the best ones. In my opinion, there's a lot of records that you and I could talk about right now that we know very well, and we could go, like the first 3 songs on on Yellow Card's Ocean Avenue, are just solid as hell. You know,
they want to hook you for a reason, right? Like,
right, exactly.
There are definitely some records that fall apart after those first couple of songs. Then you kind of go, okay, you did hook me for the first couple songs, and now I'm
done.
Yeah, and with "Welcome to the Neighborhood," it doesn't really get to that point, but you know, it definitely does fall off a little bit, and maybe those songs are more growers than they are just initial like slap you in the face with how good these songs are. But again, the way the album is structured, I think there's enough like strong moments that kind of pull you through to the end. And then the way it ends, it does make me go, okay, now I want to start it again. And that's the sign of a good record. And part of that could be like me just looking at it too, going, oh man, I really want to dig into lyrically what's going on here, because I feel like he's actually telling a story versus just, you know, maybe a bunch of songs that carry the same theme, right? Like, you know, that are inspired by the town or city of Blackpool, and that's all it is. I do like kind of looking in and going, okay, if the story's not here, I wonder if we can make this a story.
Right. Yeah, and I think you definitely could make a story out of this, and it would be kind of cool to sit down if you wanted to take the time, read the lyrics thoroughly, and then kind of go from there and figure out, like, from point A to point B, what happens in the middle. Because like you were talking about earlier, I feel like you kind of figure out the beginning and you kind of figure out the end, but what happens in between is kind of like the question mark.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely points where, again, like, it kind of changes perspective in the story, which I do think is interesting. I don't know if you had a chance to, earlier this summer, the debut full-length from Save Face was released. Did you get to listen to that one?
No, I did not.
So it is, like, they have full-on said, you know, this is essentially like a rock opera. But I almost find, and it deals with similar lyrical content in that Save Face. I think the album is called Merci. Is about like an addict who it's all about like the falling apart of his relationship, and then he also starts getting like dealing with paranoia and stuff like that. I don't feel as much like there's a beginning, middle, and end with that album as I do with this. And this album, with Boston Manor, they're not saying, oh, it's telling a story. So I mean, I guess good on them for that. It rounds out nicely. But we should get down to, so on the show we like to give albums ratings based on, the system is based on how many tracks are on the album. So it's always in flux from one album to the next. I'm like, I don't know. So this one's got 13 tracks. What would I know I didn't tell you to come up with a rating, but what do you think you'd give this record out of 13, having not even listened to the last song, which I guarantee you'll like?
Yeah, I'm sure I would too. I mean, it really fits in well, I think, with modern times and really captures what is currently happening in the present moment. Something that I did like and that I could hear in the songs that Henry kind of confirmed in that little interview I watched.
Yeah.
He was talking about one of the general topics in the album, or one of the things he was trying to get across. He was talking about how how we all have everything we could ever ask for. We have all these things now, with technology. We just have so much at our fingertips, but yet everyone's depressed, everyone's bored, everyone's sad. He's like, what's up with that? So I don't know. So with that being said, I don't know. Is this a 4 out of 5 kind of thing, or a 5 out of 10, or like what's the scale?
So it'll be out of 13. There's 13 tracks.
Oh, that's right, 13.
Yeah.
You said that. I apologize. I mean,
just kind of a rough.
It has to be
to go with.
Yeah, it has to be at least 10. I feel. Yeah. I mean, I think it was a good record. I don't know. This is probably not something I would listen to on a regular basis.
Sure.
But I really appreciate and I really like the artistic work in this album. I really do.
I would wholeheartedly agree. When I was thinking about it, I was like, I think I'd give this a 10. And really, that is like, because there are some songs where I'm like, okay, they're not bad, they're not great that happen on here, right? There are some really good songs. But again, like you said, like as a whole, as an album as a whole, I appreciate what they are going for here. And lyrically, I think it's really strong. It deals with some heavy stuff, but it doesn't do it in like an overly like cheesy sort of way. And I don't find any kind of like, just like, so for instance, the Great Depression from As It Is, I did not like that record at all. And you could argue like they share some similarities, but I just feel like this record is so much more honest, and it just feels more like, I guess like tangible, more, I don't know what the words I'm looking for, but 10 out of 13, funny. I think is,
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, it's funny you bring up, As It Is, because I think one of their members has a birthday today.
Oh, one of As It Is. That's funny.
Yeah. Sorry.
And random 10 out of 13, I think is a fair answer. And I was so pleasantly surprised because I didn't really know what to expect with this record. I knew it was coming out. I think I had listened to Halo when I added like, the pre-release on Apple Music or whatever. And I was like, okay, that's neat. And I had listened to Boston Manor a little bit in the past, but I do think it's pretty good. I tried avoiding like listening to or watching reviews of this record because I wanted to like keep that response, that reaction sort of more my own instead of reaching into what other people were saying. So now I'm interested. Now that I've gotten it out, I'm like, okay, now I want to go and watch all the reviews. And see what people say.
Yeah, and I didn't read any reviews either. I just watched that little interview. So they didn't. There was no there was no review in that 10-minute video that I watched. It was just them sitting down and talking a little bit about the album and the future, and it was a nice little snippet. It was kind of a good way to learn about what the record is about and what they were what they were aiming for, and what the future holds for them. So
awesome.
I know they want to explore more of the hip hop style, which you can hear a little bit hear some of that influence in this record. But they want to get apparently heavier too. So
Be interesting to see where they go. Yeah.
It's like, where do you go with that? And I feel like that is a big thing right now, as a lot of bands are exploring that hip hop realm into alternative rock. Which I guess is nothing new, but
yeah, I was a little worried with the first track on the record. I was like, okay, where? Because it's got, especially there are points too on the album where like his vocal delivery, I'm like, okay, he's doing a little like kind of like not full on runs, but you can hear, kind of like a pop influence on his vocals, which was fine. But like that first song, I was like, the way that hook goes, like the "Welcome to the Neighborhood," I was like, this is very like poppy. And I was like, okay, where are we going? Because so many bands have kind of made that change these days, where they seem to be getting a little more, maybe bands that were a little more aggressive, getting a little more radio friendly now. And I know some people are, crapping on some bands for that. But, they could do whatever they want. I appreciate, them putting out the music. This album, though, I was like, once it got into it, I was like, oh no, I am fully on board with this. I am digging it. And I think that, is reflected in the review that, I think both of us gave it. But yeah, so I think we're going to wrap this up. We've gone a little bit long, but let's get some important social media stuff out of the way.
Okay.
Where can people find you and the Pop Punk and Pizza podcast?
Well, I just finally changed all of the social media handles to the same one, so that way I don't have to be like, okay, Instagram is this, Twitter is this, because I think two of them were actually the same and one was only different. But right. We're Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It's all at Pop Punk Pizza Pod.
Nice.
And then I'm on Twitter at On Air with JL, my own account, and then also, if any kind of other inquiries about the show, bangarangradio@gmail.com, you can contact me there. So I think that pretty much covers it as far as our social media accounts are concerned. So I'd love to hear from anybody, honestly, bands, fans, whoever. So
yeah, and then like socials, Facebook is Music to My Peers podcast. If you just look up, in the search bar, Music to My Peers, it'll pop up. And then I'm really only on Instagram, and it's not technically it's just mine, but it's at David to My Peers. I post all about the show and my other life's goings on there as well. So anyways, yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks, man, for setting this up. Well, I think we both worked together to set this up, but this was good. We'll have to do this again sometime.